and welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about all the crazy stupid stuff that people do in marketing and how you cannot do those things. And I'm very excited to talk about profitability today because I think a lot of times, well, maybe in like the back of our mind, we're hoping that the marketing activities that we do are profitable. It doesn't necessarily come to the forefront of how maybe we're measuring things, or if you guys are paying attention to how I phrase the title about being profitable, how we think about this way of being in our businesses, and specifically the role of marketing in that. So I'm just very excited about this because I don't think anybody else is in this conversation. And from a marketer point of view, it's always great to be reminded of what are some of these things that we can keep top of mind that will allow us to be profitable. But equally, what are the things that distract us from that lead to the crazy, stupid marketing things that we're trying to avoid with the show? So that's it for the preamble today. For those of you who are joining us live, please let us know that you are here. Get into the chat. And if you have questions about the role of marketing in your business being profitable, please put them in the chat. I know there are lots of questions in this arena, so please share them in the chat. If you are also a marketer and you have experience or insights that you would like to share, please put that in the chat as well, because the more voices we get into the conversation, the more robust it can become for everybody. With that, let's talk about our guest for today. So I have John Watson joining me today, who has all of the knowledge in the foundation of these things. We're going to tap it just even the tiniest bit today to get you guys a whole bunch of golden nuggets. But John, before we get kicked off, can you tell us a little bit more about you and your journey in marketing?
Well, I started out as a sort of a scientist and, starting as an entrepreneur in an engineering company, trying to start business and trying to understand what marketing is. The sales and marketing was not something I went to school for. And I, being a very collaborative person, I sought help of all nature and was very frustrated. This is going back a long time, but it was very frustrated that I couldn't find, all I found really was people trying to sell me on things, You needed this, you needed that. It's just one sales pitch after the next. I thought, how is this related in any way to growing a business or helping me achieve my financial objectives, right? There was no connection to it at all. And I wasn't like I was lazy about it. I talked to 17 different agencies. I talked to coaches and consultants, and I just ultimately got very frustrated. Mm-hmm. And what I was really looking for was not how to do tactics, but how to grow my business. And I knew that sales and marketing was a really important component of it. Mm-hmm. And even in the books, right? You can look at, there's thousands and thousands of marketing books and sales books, and it's all tactic. It says one little tiny piece of the puzzle at a time. There's mm-hmm. really very little out there that frames it as a system, as a whole kind of way of growing your business. And so that was really the genesis of the whole exercise, was wanting it for myself. And I've spent the last 25 years trying to figure that out, right? And to make it accessible to other people and have them not struggle as much as I did when I first got going.
And I think this is like one of the things I find very interesting about, and I mean, like I'm a career marketer. And so I've spent my entire career marketing. It's possible that these types of things are also prevalent in other industries and other parts of the business. But one of the things I find specifically interesting about marketing is these like foundations. And I would actually say, and I know you and I share this, is that this is really about like foundational ways of being that drive the effectiveness of channels and tactics, but we get so distracted by the conversation about channel and tactics and what to do, and having someone else tell us what to do, that we don't necessarily get clear enough on what those foundational pieces are. So I'd love to start off the conversation there, because I feel, again, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because that's allowed on the show. The concept of being profitable really comes from this core of who you are as a business and these foundational ways of being that you set up for yourself and your marketing team, and honestly everybody else who's participating in part of the business as well. So what are your thoughts? What's your experience in that, these like foundations, and what are they?
Well, one of the most obvious foundations is cash flow. I mean, you have to make a profit in what you're doing. And often that's the farthest thing from the conversation in marketing, is how is this going to drive sales? You know, I think sales and marketing are two different things, but they're really, in my mind, a part of a continuum.
Mhm.
And ultimately, if they're not driving profitable sales, then why are you doing them, right? And it's not to say that there aren't marketing elements that don't do that. There are certain, awareness mechanisms that are not designed to drive sales directly. But if you're a small business in particular, most people are really trying to generate sales. And so one of the core things to think about is, what does that even look like? What does a profitable sale look like? What are our margins? What's the maximum cost of sale? What kind of conversion rates? What kind of cost of sale can I bear, right? And if you really don't start with that, then you can get into all kinds of behaviors that have no hope of ever achieving that, right? And that's of course what most people do, is they start with an activities-based framework. This seems like a good idea, and I do it too. I mean, I step up and I think, that'd be cool, right? We should do that. And I've just got into the habit of going, yeah, but does that really fit the economics, right? If I play that out logically and forecast it out, is there any hope whatsoever of that actually working? And quite often the answer is no.
Mm.
And so, as cool as things are, and as excited as I am to try them out, sometimes they're just not appropriate, and I have to focus on things that are. and I think that's probably one of the most fundamental things that I try to help people understand, is that there's a practical necessity for profit.
I mean, we would all like to get paid our salary, I think, right? So
Yeah, and the other one is, it's funny because people talk about brand all the time, and a lot of people have it sort of mistaken for their logo or their identity, and really brand is a synonym for reputation.
Mm.
And so ask yourself, what reputation am I trying to cultivate here? And that reputation, or that experience that you provide for people, is your marketing as well, right? So we're trying to cultivate a very specific experience that creates a outcome, profitable, meaningful outcome for the client, which in turn generates a reputation and profit for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so quite often that sort of customer experience, that reputation building focus, is overlooked as well. Like, all of it is, that's sort of where the ways of being come in, is who do we need to be in order to create that experience,
Right.
in order for the clients to become advocates and repeat customers and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which leads to the next core fundamental, which would be things like lifetime value, right? If you're a transaction-based business and you don't care if anybody ever comes back, you don't have to worry about that. But a lot of businesses are very relationship-based, and you want repeat sales and you want repeat customers, long-term customers. And so, again, if you can't necessarily make a profitable sale at the first go, then you can put it in context of what's the typical or goal target lifetime value of a customer, and then build your economic framework around that.
Mm-hmm.
So really, those two things are usually the fundamental framing of the whole marketing program. Is, I guess, three things: what's the maximum cost of sale, or lifetime value we're building the program into, and then who do we need to be to generate the customer experience that creates that lifetime value. Right?
Well, and it's really interesting, because I feel like a lot of times, and maybe I do feel like there has been more of this lately, because we continue to add like tech stack into the marketing arena. But I feel like there's a greater distance now between marketers and the activities that they're doing and the things that you mentioned, right? So things like cash flow. And when you say that, it's funny, because when I went to university, I was like, what major can get me the farthest away from accounting? Oh, marketing? Okay, good. Let's go do marketing. And I mean, like personally, I have background also in customer experience. I've been an event coordinator. Like these are things that I can like very clearly associate business value with. And so like that makes lots of sense to me. But also very commonly, especially as companies get bigger, these the departments split, and therefore the focus also splits, right? So now accounting is responsible for cash flow. Marketing is not responsible for cash flow. So now I'm not looking at cash flow every day. The customer service department is responsible for customer service. I'm not directly responsible, or I'm not being measured perhaps on the customer experience or the brand reputation, although it really should be. But there's like levels of disconnect that start to happen. So from a like marketer's point of view, so let's say I'm a marketer, maybe I'm a marketing coordinator, maybe low level marketing manager in an organization, and I'm listening to this conversation. I'm like, yeah, those things sound like things that make sense for us to focus on. What are some ways that people can start to bring these components back into the conversation?
Well, I think the easiest way is to stop calling it marketing.
Thank you. I feel like you're the only person who's ever said this on the show, and I say this all the time to like, especially my clients. I'm like, can we please stop calling this marketing?
I like to, because as soon as you call it marketing, now you've got marketing, sales, customer service, et cetera, right?
Right.
And the customer doesn't care about any of those things. The customer has a continuous experience of the company, doesn't see any of those boundaries that we're establishing. And so it's detrimental for us to call it any one of those things, right? What we're really doing is cultivating a customer experience. And if you want to look at it from an internal point of view, it's revenue operations, right? And revenue operations incorporates all of the above, right? And not just customers, sales, marketing, customer service, but it also goes into operations and whatever the business looks like. It could have warranties, it could have all kinds of stuff, right? And so all of those things, including all of the various operational components, including accounting, are part of the customer experience. Mm-hmm. And so they're all part of that revenue operations, that customer experience framework. And so I think the easiest way to stop thinking about marketing is to stop calling it that, right? And just say,
language
look, this is
makes a big difference.
Yeah. And so we're really starting with the wrong premise. And I'm a marketer too. I mean, I love marketing, and yet I also don't care about it, right? Because it's ultimately the goal is earnings growth, customer retention, earnings growth, profitability, and so it's really a business function more so than anything else. And if you just get caught up in the activities of marketing, you're kind of missing the point.
Right.
And
I'm
I think
totally with you on that.
The biggest thing with your team is they're going to naturally, especially younger folks, right? Because they come through school and it's all Procter and Gamble kind of advertising, old school product, consumer based marketing, right? It does, and which only represents less than 11% of the economy. And so there's all the rest of us trying to do marketing with a model that doesn't actually apply to us, right? And so they're, who goes to school for marketing, they come out really misaligned with the vast majority of small business marketers' needs. And then they get sucked into the tactical vortex and they get lost, right? It's really easy. It's new and it's exciting and it's what's happening, right? And that's certainly what people are asking for.
Right.
Right. And so to be able to step back and say, well, no, yes, those things are all important and you have to know how to do them and do them well when they're appropriate. But the first question
I think that when the appropriate is like where a lot of this confusion comes in too.
Well, and you have this sort of blind leading the blind scenario, right? Because there's a lot of agencies that are, their goal is to sell you stuff. That's not a real problem with them. It's like, that's what they do for a living, right? Of course, they want you to buy those things. And so you have an owner often who's not really clear on the whole sales marketing paradigm. You've got young people who don't have a lot of experience. You've got vendors that are, just trying to help and do what they do, right? Which is show up and offer whatever that is they offer. And so where's that planning? Where's the strategy? How does how is any of this automatically going to fall into some sort of miraculous revenue generating scheme? When it's all just tactic, right?
Yeah.
And so the real challenge is somebody's got to step back and say, what is the goal, and why are we doing these things, and how does it help us achieve these goals, right? And it's really uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the absence. So if you don't have the goal in the first place, and you're not clear on the success criteria, and then you're not measuring anything, you set yourself up for kind of a continuous crazy stupid marketing, right?
Crazy stupid marketing. Well, and this is the thing too, which is like really interesting, because then I feel like because we don't have anything meaningful that we're measuring, we can like fill the gap with things we can measure, which I think, they're called vanity metrics for a reason, folks. They don't mean anything. And like, I wrote a blog post yesterday, and I'm like, okay, well, if you are Andre DeGrasse running, and he's Canadian Olympic sprinter, for those of you who are not Canadian. He's like our golden boy. He could measure how many times he laced up his shoes. In fact, lacing up your shoes is important, right? You're probably not running super fast if your shoes are flopping off of your feet, right? So like, yes, it contributes, but there's a lot of other things that contribute, especially when we compare it to what drives performance versus what is like the minimum viable thing that needs to happen.
Well, I think KPIs, key performance indicators, are part of that purpose defining exercise in the beginning, right? If you don't know why you're doing it and you don't know how to measure it, then you're sort of hoping for the best, right? Hope. I always joke that hope is an excellent girl's name, but it makes a lousy strategy, right?
Yep. Like in Sandler training, they have like bottles on the table that say hopium. And they say the same thing about sales, right? Like, sales doesn't work with hopium as the input.
Yeah, I've not heard the hopium before. That's excellent.
Yeah.
No, it's really the metrics part of it. I mean, your statement about trying to get as far away from accounting as possible is not uncommon, right? This whole data space has not been part of marketing up until really the last 20 years. It's sort of come into its heyday. I mean, it's been around actually 100 years, more than 100 years. The first book on it was called Scientific Advertising, right? I mean, it's 100 years old. And so the premise is not new in any way. It's just hasn't been part of the marketing paradigm. I shouldn't call it marketing, it's advertising paradigm is really where most of us associate marketing, is advertising of some nature. And historically it was, media advertising, and it was very disconnected from the sales process, and so very difficult to measure. And it ended up with a highly disconnected, unaccountable culture, because, there was very difficult to measure. Right. And there's always been this counterculture, which represented about 5% of the industry, which was called direct marketing or direct response marketing or performance marketing. It's always been the little dog, right? And all the data nerds are in there doing their direct response. And it used to be catalogs and stuff like that, direct mail and catalog sales. And now, of course, the internet is sort of embrace that model, although it really, it's a stretch to say that that's true. The potential is there, but it's certainly not the norm yet.
Right.
But it really kind of harkens back to that 100-year-old framework, right? That really just wasn't part of the culture before. And now that the technology is all there, there's still that hangover from the advertising, media, big,
broadcast
media advertising, and where marketing didn't have that accountability, right? And I think it's still alive and well.
Well, and I think too, like, I think about this because I started my career in like retail furniture, and the way that sales and marketing works in that model is very disconnected. So marketing sits in a corporate office, they make flyers, they create radio ads. This is also back when there was newspaper ads, so you can extrapolate my age based on that. But it was marketing's job to get people in the store. And the way it was measured was there enough people in the store? And enough is a flexible term, right? It costs this store this amount of money to be in business, right? But there is that overarching like revenue operations model, right? Saying like we have to pay this much for our space, we have to pay this much for our product, we pay this much for advertising, we pay this much for sales. Are we making a profit? And we may not know specifically where everything is coming from, but as a holistic view, we know. And if we're not, then we close stores, right? That's what they do. The sales team's responsibility was to stand in the store and sell people stuff if they came into the store. That's it, right? The way the model was built didn't require sales and marketing to be overly connected. And so the disconnect, while it might be fine in that model, if you then like take that model and extrapolate it to a business where now your sales and marketing teams are both participating in the digital arena simultaneously, well, now we have a problem because now our resources are not by nature disconnected. So if we treat them as disconnected, we have a problem because they're not disconnected.
Well, you're sort of not recognizing the system, right?
Right. Well, and I think a
that's
lot of
part
times
of it.
the system isn't clear. Like they haven't done that foundational revenue operation exercise of how these two things work together. So then the teams don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and I think the challenging thing is you don't need to know how everything works. The first step is just being able to measure, the goals and whether or not we're achieving our goals, and how far off of that are we, right? And it's a good starting point, right? And a lot of folks don't even do that, right? They're just looking at the basic, are we profitable? But where's that actually coming from? And then the next step is let's fraction that up and see, what can we measure? Are there certain elements? Then usually there's things that are easier to measure than others.
Right.
And you can start to do process of elimination. It's like, well, we can measure this and we can measure this and we can measure this, but these ones, not so much. But you start with what you have, right? And part of it too is moving away from simple transactions and sort of just straight revenue and looking at it more from a customer perspective, right? Are we just blowing money up, hand over fist to try to generate new customers all the time? Or are we actually looking to retain those customers, right? How do we create the repeat customer, the long-term successful customer, right? Who has a high lifetime value, who refers to us and is a promoter, right? And the problem is most of the systems, like if you look at a standard point of sale system, they don't measure any of that, right? Very few of them anyways have built-in metrics that are about anything versus product velocity or, it's all very transaction processing or organized, right?
Right.
And rightfully so, because you have to deal with inventory and logistics and all of that. But the customer piece tends to get missed. And yet they're often focusing on the customer is often the most profitable thing that you can do. Right. And so when you're spending all this money on advertising, it's kind of like a sieve, right? Where all this money is going into dumping water in the sieve, but it just drains out as fast as you can dump it in there.
Yeah.
And what if you were to just put some paper down in there and hold some of that for longer, right? It's these are the kind of silly, crazy, stupid things that we do is we overemphasize promotion and underemphasize the retention. And not just retention, but customer development. And so that's part of the being profitable is to say, look, we have to be successful and profitable on our transaction level, but we also need to look at where can we really maximize earnings growth, by doing things such as, generating repeat customers and long-term relationships with clients, right? And then sort of recognizing the whole thing as a big system that we can, not fraction it out in all the little parts, but look at it as its individual component parts and then try to measure whatever you can, little at a time until you can start to bring more and more of it under control.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, there's an opportunity there to get creative about how you're tracking stuff, right? Like,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
yes, we have accounting rules and guidelines and laws. And so I'm not necessarily talking about creative accounting, but like from a marketing point of view, if you're very clear on what you're trying to measure, there's lots of creative ways to do that. And there's lots of questions that we can ask our clients. And there's lots of conversations that we can be having that can reveal these types of qualitative data. Um, if we're like so obsessed with the quantitative data that we are blinding ourselves to those opportunities for information that is actually tied to how our goals are being met, and this is qualitative. Like, I remember
That's
having
both.
a conversation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's not either or, it's a there's the possibilities for both exist, and as long as it's connected to your goal, then good. And if it's
Well, I
not,
think the thing is people are, it's, there's so much to do, right? You can get really overloaded with just trying to complete everything.
mhm,
And so to lose track, you not see the forest for the trees, right? And I think the real opportunity is to say, look, let's just focus in for a little while on the core purpose of things.
mhm,
And just step back and work on the business, not just in the business. And you can say
right,
the same thing about marketing, right? Let's work on the overall strategy versus just the day-to-day execution elements. And it's that strategy piece that's tricky because people are so focused on the day-to-day, right? There's so much to do and it's overwhelming in its own right. And so how do you give yourself permission to step back and really look at it holistically?
right. And I do think this is one of the benefits of having a like marketing advisor, is that they can be that oversight to say like, okay, just whoa there. Yes, we've been doing this and we're trying to go here, but we're not going there. Right. So, like, let's look at what's contributing, what's not contributing. And then there's also opportunities to like reveal sticky points, right? In our belief system. And like, but I have to post on social media every day. But do you have to post on social media every day? What if you posted on social media twice a week? What is social media to you, right? I like to look at social media as if it's the like footnotes section of a book. Right? There are lots of people who will never ever read the footnotes section of your book. And if you have data that says to you, oh, none of the people who actually buy stuff have done so through a social media post. Okay, I'm not saying don't do them, right? Maybe they help you in terms of how you feel like you're building your reputation and things like that. It might have a role in the system. It's just that's not its role.
I'll
So
just be
we
clear on what its role actually is,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think social media quite often is more about top of mind, right? You're engaging your community, staying top of mind, and there's value in that for sure, right?
Mhm.
The challenge really is determining whether or not that awareness, that top of mind awareness, translates into anything, right? Does it
Right.
actually generate referrals? Does it generate visits to the website? Does it generate sales? Does it generate traffic to a store?
Right.
And quite often when we look at the stats, the numbers are pretty low,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I do think, I mean, like, even in marketing, it's very common to hear like it takes 7 touches for somebody to like remember that they saw a thing, right? But it's not just they saw 7 social media posts, right? They are exposed in, I mean, like the phrase 20 years ago was multi channel marketing, but like really what we're saying is humans have a holistic experience and they are experiencing your business potentially in different channels. They might be in a store, they might be on an online site where you were advertised, they might have engaged in a post, they might have met your CEO in person. Right? Like, there's lots of different ways that people can engage with
Yeah,
your business
I
brand.
think the challenge is giving yourself permission to not buy into all that,
Mm,
right? Because while what you're saying is absolutely true, you do need to generate awareness in all these various touch points.
mm,
Ultimately, that's a trap, right? You can get stuck in that sort of thinking, or well, we have to try everything. We have to be all of this activity, and assuming that there's all these multiple touch points are going to translate into sales, and quite often they don't,
Right.
right? So the real question is always asset allocation. We only have so much time. There's only so much money. So where do we allocate our resources to generate the biggest return?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just easy to fall into that trap of, oh, it's an omni-channel marketing program and we need to have all these touch points and we're going to just drive ourselves crazy trying to do everything and not measure it and just sort of hope for the best, right? Back to the
Right.
hope as a strategy. And what you find, and modern tracking tools can track a lot of that, right? They can see, well, the first time they showed up was here, and then they did this, and then they did this, and you can see this sort of the influence of multiple touch points driving people to the website. But how does that accumulate up, right? And what's the unit cost of all of that? And does that unit cost have any viability, right? And then you could say, well, geez, that's really, really expensive. What might we do that's more directly leading to outcomes that are profitable?
Right.
And so
maybe there's one part of that strategy that's doing the heavy lifting.
And it often is. I remember I had a client that was spending a bunch of money on advertising. And every year for 5 years, they were spending, right? And it was when we eventually, they connected with us and we ran the numbers. We said, you guys have been spending $500,000 a year on advertising and you're losing. It was terrible. Absolutely nothing coming from it, right?
Right.
They were losing $1,100 per sale and on average. And the bulk of their business was from referrals. Like over 90% of it was coming from referrals. And all the money that they were making on their core business was being blown out the door on advertising, which was not contributing hardly at all, right? It just, what they were doing didn't make sense based on the economics of the business or how the business actually worked. But because we weren't measuring anything, right? It was just, we should do that. That's cool. That strokes our ego. And so, but that's a lot of money. I mean, think about what you could do with that $500,000 a year. I mean, I realize that's a larger example than most small businesses are going to, blow on marketing, but the same.
I had a client that was blowing $4 million a year on marketing. So it happens.
Well, it's just scale, right? And I think the thing is nowadays, I mean, 89% of the Canadian business community is small business, right? So, we really have to tailor things down to, to the practical sizes of how we're organized as a company, as a country. And a lot of these big ideas that we see, all this media stuff, just doesn't apply, right? It applies to Pepsi and Coke and, maybe Nike and some of these, Apple, but that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's no correlation back to, many small businesses. And so we just get caught up in what we see and experience the big brands doing. And we think it has that we should be doing what they're doing, right? And often it makes zero sense.
Well, we also forget that at one point, those brands were small businesses too that didn't do that type of marketing, right? So if you look at Apple in the 1970s, right, like they didn't do the same kind of advertising that they do now. It's not in the same volumes, not in the same style, right? And we often, like you said, we get caught up in what we see, but we forget that, like, I'm not at that same part of the journey. I don't have $1 million just to throw at a Super Bowl ad and not care if it works, right?
Well, most of us are cash flow constrained, right? It's all about cash flow. And when you're, still in that stage of business where it's got to keep the doors open, right? When we're investing money in, it has to actually contribute something, because if it doesn't, we're not going to, the runway's short.
Right.
And, there's so many small businesses operate on that basis for a long, long time, particularly when you're in rapid growth mode, right? Your cash flow burn rate goes crazy, and you can go up, growth will kill you too, right? It's always about allocating resources effectively, right? Where are we getting the best bang for the buck? And I think one of the biggest challenges with marketing is people don't understand it. They don't have a real construct for it. Right. And there's a tendency to outsource it.
Yes.
right? I don't understand it. I really don't want to understand it. I'd rather somebody else take care of it. And then it ends up being a bunch of tactical service providers executing a bunch of independent tactics that don't really add up to much,
Right.
right? Or, there's really nobody who's aware of what the goal is, right? It's just, we've executed this tactic well. Look how good it looks, right? It's working.
Yeah.
And it's operating.
Right. And
Nobody
I
set any
think that's the
goals.
difference, right? Between operating and working, because it works if it delivers on your goals. There's a lot of things that can operate that don't deliver on your goals and operate well, right?
Absolutely.
Well, depending
But I
on how
think
you
the
define
main
well.
problem is vendors don't know what that means, right? Because
Yeah.
you haven't told them,
Yeah.
right? And if they don't know what the goals are, how are they supposed to achieve them, right? And people, they don't include them in the conversation many times because they don't know themselves,
Right.
right? So you just have them running off, executing a tactic probably very well, but without any goalposts, right?
Right.
So it's like, yeah, that's a beautiful campaign. It looks amazing, right? We're gonna like my mom's gonna love that. And but that's really the end of it, right? And so
Yeah.
the biggest challenge that I always try to encourage owners to do is to stop fluffing off the marketing off, like delegate. Now it's not even delegation, it's abdication, right?
Right.
We're pawning it off on somebody else because we don't understand it, don't want to understand it. We want, don't nothing to do with it.
Right.
Just please take this away from me, right? Don't spend too much.
Yeah.
And what I always try to do is get people to say, no, you can't do that, right? You don't have to understand how to do it all. You just have to understand the goals, right? And be able to communicate those goals in a thoughtful, meaningful way to your suppliers so that they can contribute to achieving those goals.
Right.
But if we don't, as owners, don't describe the goals and we don't engage in conversations about the goals, then our likelihood of achieving those goals goes down pretty fast.
Yeah. It's like the number one question I ask is like, what's the goal of this? What is this supposed to do? If we create a video, what is that supposed to do for our business? Because we could spend a lot of time and a lot of money creating videos that don't contribute at all to the business.
Well, and it's not all about money either, right? I mean, you can have multiple goals, but
Mhm.
it's about knowing what the goal actually is, right? As
Yes.
long as you go, I'm clear what the goal, this is the outcome that I'm in service of,
Mhm.
right? How am I going to measure that outcome?
Mhm.
And, we're going to execute this tactic and expect, and I guess the other thing is just don't expect it to be right in the first place.
Right.
I think there's a big part of the desire around marketing is we're going to do it perfect. It's going to be a one and done kind of exercise. We're going to throw it out there and it's going to be great. Right.
And
And because
all marketers everywhere will tell you that that's not a thing.
but that's the goal, right? That's sort of the expectation or the desire. And people, and without the measurement, that really is the end goal, right? You do it,
Right.
you hope for the best because there's no measurement, you have no idea.
Right.
But I've always tried to encourage people to say, look, let's start with whatever the goal is, if it's financial or otherwise. How are we going to measure it? How rapidly can we measure it? And plan the whole thing, anticipating iteration, rapid
Right.
iteration.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that just flies in the face of standard practice too,
Right.
right? And it's a matter of saying, look, we don't expect it to be perfect. We're going to start with a minimum viable whatever, right? And we're going to measure it. We're going to iterate like crazy on it until it becomes actually effective.
Yeah. Well, and this
But
is
that
actually
changes the
interesting.
paradigm.
Yeah, because Dulce has an interesting comment here too, about how a day-to-day generally looks like picking up the pieces or fixing things. It mostly never is about growth, but just about reacting to missteps. And the thing about that, when you extrapolate the actual activity, which we could say picking up the pieces and fixing things, learning and growing, right? Like stuff didn't work, now we have to fix it. So we're actually doing that activity on a day-to-day basis, but we're not intentionally doing it as part of the process, right? Like it's like we're looking at it as if like something's broken, fix it, put a band-aid on, instead of like really what works most successfully in a marketing process is like I have a hypothesis, I test a thing, I see what works, I see what doesn't, and I iterate to the point where I have a system that works. And then stuff blows up in the economy or COVID happens. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe that doesn't work now anymore. But I actually have an internal practice that allows me to get back into that iterative exploratory experimentation zone. So now I can like take what I had that worked before but doesn't work anymore and go back into the iteration process to say like, okay, now I got to get to the next version of this that is going to work again.
The whole idea is so much of it is reactive, right? You try it, you try to make it perfect, you eventually get around to doing the analysis and you realize, geez, this is not quite working yet. And how do we iterate and iterate and iterate, which thankfully is way easier than it used to be.
Yeah.
And
Peter says, plan the work and work the plan.
It is, absolutely. And the challenge is just getting your head, kind of setting yourself up to be proactive, that to make that part of the day-to-day exercise, as opposed to hoping for the best and then reacting when it doesn't live up to expectations.
Right. And firing your marketing service provider and finding another person who has the same amount of foundational information because the goals haven't been redefined yet, and just end up doing the same thing.
Well, and I think that most marketers are talented, well-intentioned, all of that, right? And the problem is quite often they're not comfortable engaging in the business conversation with their clients, and their clients go, "Why, as a marketer, are you asking me this?" Right? And so
I get that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why are you asking me about my finances? Why are you asking about lifetime value and profitability and all of that? It just seems like, why are you asking this? And you have to really be able to answer them in a thoughtful way for them to go, oh, well, I never thought of it that way. And now let's start to collaborate on how to get on the same page together to actually work on business outcomes when they have you pegged as some sort of artist that has no financial wherewithal, when you may very well have all kinds of expertise in the area, but they've got you pigeonholed as, some creative that doesn't understand. And it's an unfortunate bias that I think we need to step up as an industry and sort of demonstrate that we're actually a lot more competent than that. Give us a chance and we can actually, do more. We can be more effective if you include us in the process.
Right. Okay, there's so much good stuff here, but I do want to come back to Dulce asked a question right at the beginning of the conversation. But it's kind of industry specific. So sorry, Dulce, for leaving it till now. But the question is about how can we boost the marketing in the hospitality and restaurant business? Seems to be even more ever-changing and very, very dependent on the economy. And I think this has much to do with the conversation we had earlier about the customer experience and what is that like brand reputation that we are driving. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question, John.
Well, I think hospitality is an interesting one. It depends on the nature of the situation, right? I mean, I think there's certain practical realities of it. But I think it comes back to fundamentals again, right? If you're delivering value and if you're cultivating your existing customers as opposed to just relying on advertising, the challenge I find is most people have no idea who their customers are. They don't really take the time to record it anywhere. They don't put mechanisms in place to get feedback actively from their customers, to engage them and invite them back, right? And so there's no magic bullet. There's a combination of the efficiency of the advertising, the customer experience itself, the value proposition that you're offering. You may need to be adapted given the economics of the situation. Having a clear competitive strategy, that's often one that is, just a whole bunch of Me Too businesses, right? And really having some key differentiator that people can latch onto of why I'm going to go there, right? How do you create preference over just traffic? So I don't think there's a simple answer. I think it comes back to what's the system and what's the economics of it, and how do we manipulate what we can given the circumstances.
Yeah, and I think like Dulce and anybody else who's kind of in that scenario, whether it is in hospitality or any other industry, really. I mean, one of the things I've been hearing like very often right now is like participate heavily in the startup ecosystem is people being like, well, nobody's investing. Like people can't raise funds, right now. There's also businesses who are successfully raising funds right now. And so we like to look at these things. We think the easy button is just like, oh, someone tell me what to do, right? I'll come to the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show and Tracy and John will tell me exactly what to do and I can take that away and go and do stuff. Unfortunately, what we're here telling you today is that this isn't about just doing stuff, and it's not necessarily about just working another person's system, right? If you are Best Western, and maybe that works for Hilton, I don't know, just because they're both hotels, right? Really look at the difference between like a McDonald's and a like high-end steakhouse, right? The way that the volume of business is different, the type of experience they're creating is different. I mean, my local McDonald's can't get an order right to save their lives. So, like, I don't even go there anymore. But that's a customer service thing, right? Like, that has nothing to do with an advertisement I saw for them. And so, it's an opportunity, I would say, to look at your holistic experience, to say, who are our customers? How do we attract them? Right? Like, which ones are the ones that are a problem? We all have those problem customers where we're like, well, I really don't want more of those. Right? So like, who are the customers you have that you want more of? How did they learn about you?
Well, I think part of the opportunity, and one of the things I see not enough of really, is the customer research. Talking to our customers, let's call it simply just asking customers, what did you think? What can we do better? Because ultimately nowadays you've got, your online reputation is a click away. Everybody can see everybody else's comments.
Yep.
And so if we're not actively asking how can we do a better job, then we're just going to see what people are unhappy with as reviews online. Right?
And then it's too late.
So it's part of marketing really is stepping up and saying, I really care about what people think, right? We're going to proactively ask on a regular basis, some systematic way of eliciting customer feedback and then actually doing something with it, right? And not just simple things like customer satisfaction, like ask them real questions, get their real insights. And be able to act on those insights in a meaningful way that does generate those amazing experiences that give you a bit of a buffer against, one, you'll encourage your online reputation, but you'll also be more buoyant in the marketplace because people really get that you're an exceptional service provider. Yeah. And you listen and you're proactive and, modify things proactively. And it's really an untapped opportunity. There's so few organizations that actually, talk to their customers. And not just ask them simple questions, but
yes. Can you please just not just send them an NPS survey with no other questions and then assume that we did customer listening? Yeah,
an NPS is a lousy stat. It's really unactionable, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it may tell you there's an issue, but what do you do about it? What's the source of the problem?
Yeah.
And that's net promoter score of NPS.
Yes.
But it really is a terrible metric. I mean, it's useful in its own right, but it's not actionable, right? So in order to make it actionable, you actually have to ask meaningful questions that reflect the experience of the customer, so that you can see what's going wrong or not.
I always think too, like this is, if you look at it as whether or not it reflects your brand experience, right? If the brand experience I want to give people is white glove, handheld, high ticket type of things. I remember having this conversation with a custom home designer that I worked with that was like $5 million homes and up, right? Like, yeah, you could send them an NPS survey that is just one question, but does that match the brand experience you're trying to create? Because if it doesn't match the brand experience you're trying to create, then yes, let's do customer listening, but let's do customer listening in the way that matches your brand experience.
Well, yeah,
take them a bottle of wine and have a conversation.
There's lots of different ways of doing it. It's just a matter of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And even surveys are good. And just because it's a survey doesn't mean it can't be thoughtful.
Right.
Right. And I think a lot of times people ask just very simple questions as opposed to thoughtful questions.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, it's harder to analyze qualitative information than it is, quantitative, but it's a lot of this times what you measure in these surveys is not actionable. And so, right, how do you take that next step in order to measure things that are actually meaningful to the customer that you have the ability to act upon?
Mhm.
And that requires a bit more sophistication than a 5-star rating and a, little tiny comment that goes up on your review page. And
Right.
right. And so it's really a matter of going beyond that into let's invite feedback so that we can continuously improve and ultimately improve our reputation and ultimately become a better business because of it.
Right. And I mean, all of us have been in that scenario where we had somebody who was just like, go online and give us a 5-star review. Like, you're not even curious about whether or not I had a 5-star experience with you today. You just want me to go give you a 5-star review. Well, this says something about how you see me as a customer. So now if I feel transactional, one, what is my incentive to go give you a 5-star review? Very low. Two, what's my incentive to come back and have that experience again? Because do I want to have that experience again? Maybe not. And these are the types of things too. We get distracted by the 5-star review, and then I gotta have a 5-star review because otherwise AI is not going to find me in a search and blah blah blah. But what drives the 5-star review? What makes someone want to give you a 5-star review without you asking them? I'm not saying don't ask them, but I'm just like, what kind of experience would dictate 5 stars? Are you creating that? Because if you're not creating that, yet you're asking people to give you a 5-star review,
I think
experience.
So you roll all this up into, marketing is not advertising, right? If
Right.
you want to call it I prefer to call it revenue operations or business development is a nice kind of roll up, even though that gets kind of lumped into sales sometimes. But if you say our real goal here is to grow the business, is to develop the business, right? And so then what is the system we're putting in place that enables us to continuously improve and to become more profitable and have happier, better experiences consistently delivered, right? That ultimately lead to repeat business and well-developed customers who provide referrals and et cetera, right? And
Mhm.
and ultimately those things drive not just profit but earnings growth. Right. And I think that's a huge, profit you could do on a transaction level. Earnings growth often requires more than that. Right. It's a lifetime value thing and or often is. And what is the system that you're putting in place in order to manage all of that, right? To not just drive sales, but to cultivate these long-term relationships and excellent experiences that cultivate their online reputation and et cetera, right? And it's the systems view quite often that's missing. We get lost in the technology, the tech stack, even though the tech stack is absolutely critical to enable the system to happen, it's still just a tech stack by itself, out of context with the system. It's just a bunch of technology, right? So the first question is, what are we trying to do here? Like, what's our plan? Right? How do all these tactics roll up into some sort of integrated system to achieve the target outcomes that we've established that, that really are critical to our business? And I think that's the real opportunity in all of this is to stop getting stuck in these one-off tactics, right? I think a whole drawer full of one-off tactics does not a system make.
And I think when we think about it from a machinery point of view, right? Like if I'm trying to build a clock, but I have a whole bunch of car parts, I'm probably not going to have the easiest time making a clock. But
It'd
we
be pretty
don't
funky
think
looking.
about what we're trying to make when we just collect parts, right? And then we're like, but we have a whole bunch of parts. Yeah, you got parts of a boat, but parts of a boat aren't going to make a watch.
I think the key
sorry, go
really is
with
tying
the
it
wrap
back to
up
this
here,
whole way
John.
of
Yeah.
being thing is really it comes from leadership, right? The underlying fundamentals are the business owner you really can't keep delegating this stuff off to other people and hoping for the best. It has to be driven by you. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to understand it all, but you do have to drive conversations, right? And expect more from your vendors and say, look, I'm going to involve you in the strategic conversation. And I'm going to tell you what my needs are, or we can work together to figure out what those needs are. And then we're going to go and we're going to execute some tactic in a way that actually has a hope of achieving those goals. But that requires a conversation. It requires a completely different conversation than quite often happens. And, and it's not generally led by, it's a conversation that quite often just is missing.
Right. And it's usually not just the output you got from ChatGPT.
Yeah. So
not
really
that you
the whole
can't use AI in a helpful way, but there's lots of unhelpful ways people are using
Well,
it.
AI is, I think, tremendously useful in terms of understanding the fundamentals and in terms of how do I construct, what are the KPIs that are relevant in this, right? It can be very useful in understanding the overall opportunities and the strategy and the technologies, and sort of, you can ask it all kinds of questions that you'd have a really hard time getting answers to anywhere else. So I like using it for that perspective, because if you're curious, it will tell you, it can really get you thinking differently. And I think that's the whole premise of this, is like, stop thinking about marketing as advertising or websites or social media or any of these tactics, and start thinking system. And then what does that actually mean? Right? The system doesn't exist in isolation either. It's there to achieve a set of objectives.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't know what those are, then it's no amount of engineering is going to generate, that outcome miraculously.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, John. Well, I feel like we could keep talking about this for a long time. But if people are interested in continuing the conversation, which I would highly recommend, because I think what we've demonstrated here today is that this is an exploratory conversation and there's many things to explore. Where is the best place for people to find you if they would like to continue the conversation with you?
Well, probably the easy two places is LinkedIn, and on my website, Accrue Marketing, ACCRUE marketing.com. And I always try to encourage people, and I've got a bunch of free resources, like there's 20 free downloadable ebooks.
Really good resources, folks. I have some of them.
The Being Profitable book that I wrote is really all about getting people to change how they think about marketing, to sort of approach it more in a systems sort of logical rollout sequence, as opposed to a bunch of random activities. It's not meant to be a how-to book. It's really meant to be a think differently about this, right? Let's revisit the fundamentals at every step along the way, and sort of approach it more from a fundamentals conversation perspective. So the book is 20 different conversations to have with your marketing folks. And, it can be overwhelming to think, oh, geez, there's 20 different ones, but you're not doing them all at once, right? There's a natural inherent rollout strategy. And so my recommendation for people is what I already said, is stop thinking about marketing as advertising, start thinking about it as a system, as a way to really a mechanism that is designed to grow revenue or grow earnings growth. And what is the system that you're building?
Right.
And don't try to delegate it to everybody else. Like, own it, right? You don't have to do it, but you do have to own it.
I think that's really important, the ownership component. And I mean, there's many golden nuggets that people can take away from this, but I think that is one big piece, is that how can you own it while enabling yourself with a team that can support you, whether that's outsourced service providers, internal employees, free like strategic advisors. What does that look like? What does that look like for you? And how can you go create that?
I like to call it a team sport, right? I mean, this whole business development's a team sport. So how do you construct a team that can look at all these various components and really somebody to help you organize it, to really see it as a system, and other people that are really focused on implementation, but ultimately everybody focused on the same outcomes.
Right. Absolutely. Love it, John. Thank you so much for sharing your time and insights with us today. That was so awesome. Thank you to Peter and Manaj and Dulce and Life is Football for joining us in the chat today. Thank you for sharing your questions and your perspectives. It always makes the conversation more robust. And that's it for today. We'll be back next week with, I can't remember off the top of my head what topic, but it's going to be another crazy, stupid marketing explosion of thoughts on how we can be a little bit more, or dare I say a lot more, productive with our marketing time. So John, thank you again for your time today, and everyone else, we'll see you next time. And until then, permission to do you. Bye bye.